Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, October the 2nd, 2024. Today would be Mahatma Gandhi's 155th birthday, and I've never looked at Mahatma Gandhi's horoscope before. Obviously, he's a really iconic figure of the 20th century, someone associated with non-violent resistance, specifically to the British rule of India. And yeah, he's seen as someone who is highly spiritual. Mahatma, of course, means great soul. And you would have expected all of this to show up in his horoscope. And that's what I want to look at. So I kind of want to have a break from the news, from Ukraine, from Gaza, from Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah, let's look at Mahatma Gandhi's horoscope and nothing else. Well, I don't say quite nothing else, because before I look at Mahatma Gandhi, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, October the 2nd, 2024. Usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed and you enjoy this video, I'd be really happy if you were to subscribe to my channel. So let's start off by considering what is happening today. So here is the horoscope for today, or rather the positions of the planets at noon, set for New York. And so top right, of course, that is Mahatma Gandhi. And so the big thing today is the new moon. It's the annular eclipse. So all eclipses of the sun are new moons. Some new moons are eclipses of the sun. So we have the moon in Libra, and the moon in Libra gives us the concept of perhaps of balance, trying to do the right thing, perhaps trying to accommodate other people. And with the moon, in terms of the way we respond, we are, I think, more aware of the social environment than usual. And with this new moon, we perhaps are also feeling that it's the beginning of something. You know, it's the beginning of a new lunar cycle, and it's a time of growth. You know, it's a time when the moon is waxing. It's starting to get bigger. Of course, we can't see the moon at the time of a new moon, because that is the very beginning. It's the stage at which the seed starts to germinate, and it's quite a hidden stage of a new moon, where we don't quite know what's happening. It's too early to perhaps to talk about things, but nonetheless we know that something has started, and I think that is something that is very optimistic and hopeful. But there is nonetheless a fragility to the new moon, because the moon is by definition conjunct the sun. The moon is combust, and it's very, very close to the sun. And of course, you know, the moon is a sort of a feminine, rather passive energy, and close to the sun, it's just a little bit overwhelming for the moon. So at the time of a new moon, it's important to sort of take it slowly. Now, it is true that it is an annular eclipse. Now, the reason it's an annular eclipse, as I was explaining in yesterday's video when I was doing a preview of a new moon, is because the moon is a long way from the Earth. The moon is at apogee. So apo means far away, furthest point. G means the Earth. So it's the furthest point in its cycle to the Earth. And so when you have an eclipse at close to the apogee, a lunar eclipse, a solar eclipse, the moon, from the perspective of the Earth, seems relatively small, not large enough to cover the disk of the sun. Hence, the annular eclipse from the Latin annulus, because there is a ring, because the sun doesn't, the moon doesn't cover the sun, and so it does not have the strength of a total eclipse. And I know some people are concerned about this eclipse. They see eclipse, panic, but I think for most of us, there's no need to panic about the fact that this is an eclipse. We're not going to see darkness anywhere. It's not a huge deal. So I don't think we should worry about it too much, though it might bring things to the surface. This new moon is close to true black moon Lilith. The sun is conjunct true black moon Lilith today, and so is the moon. And so, we may be aware that under the surface things are a bit difficult. We may be aware that people are hiding things, are not being entirely honest, and some people just don't want to deal with the shadows. They want to pretend that the shadows don't exist, but in the shadows there's some powerful stuff going on. So yes, I think we do need to be aware of that. The moon is also making a conjunction to Mercury. Moon conjunct Mercury, generally speaking, moon conjunct Mercury is quite a nice aspect, because the moon and Mercury, these two planets, they're both about communication, the communication from the brain and the communication from the heart. And so when they come together, it does help us to express what's on our mind. But because the moon is conjunct Mercury in Libra, we can do it in a fairly civilized kind of way. So that is something of a bonus. Now, Mercury is sesquiquadrate Uranus. So there's Mercury at 11:20 Libra, and there's Uranus at 26:52 Taurus. So they are making a sesquiquadrate. So when I talked about the moon conjunct Mercury, I said that it was going to be relatively easy to communicate. Yet Mercury is sesquiquadrate Uranus, so sometimes the things we say might cause upset, confusion, or a disturbance. That is possible because of that Uranus. So we perhaps need to be a little careful what words we use. And though on a positive note, Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus can stir things up, can make people think again, can create the possibility of sort of revolutionary thought. Maybe we'll want to keep our revolutionary thoughts to ourselves. We might see things in a different way, and that is perhaps somewhat dramatic. And we do have to consider what impact we're having on other people. But I think because we've got the moon conjunct Mercury, and that does perhaps give us a certain amount of sensitivity, we'll make sure that we don't rock the boat, but I suppose some of us might not be able to help ourselves. Now, recently we had a trine between Mars and Saturn. You can see that Mars is at 1543, Saturn is at 1415, so Mars is separating from Saturn, and that seems all well and good. Mars trine Saturn, it on the surface it provides focus and discipline. That Mars in Cancer is not going to get out of hand because Saturn is controlling it. But perhaps we should think about the midpoint between Mars and Saturn. So if Saturn is at 1415 Pisces, and in other words, Saturn is about 45 arc minutes before 15 degrees of the sign, and Mars is around 43 arc minutes after the degree of the sign, we know where the midpoint is. We can see that the midpoint, you can see it by eye actually, the midpoint of Mars and Saturn is at around 15 Taurus. It's pretty much exactly at 15 Taurus. So what's the big deal about that? Well, I'll tell you what the big deal about that is. That 15 degrees for Taurus is 45 degrees from 0 degrees Aries. Now, I regard 45-degree aspects as being important, in terms of the German schools of astrology. I mean, like Ebertin and the cosmobiology approach, and Alfred Witter and the Uranian school. We have Aries conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And Aries conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint is not nice. Mars-Saturn is the death axis. It's about destruction. It's about a delay. Will it affect us as individuals? Probably not. In fact, almost certainly not. But the Aries is the world. It's a world out there. It's what's happening in the world. And with Aries conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it does indicate bad things going on. Not just today, but, as it hangs around, I suppose, yesterday, today, tomorrow, Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it can be about situations which lead to a great deal of suffering. And, yesterday I talked about some of the people who had Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. For example, Vladimir Zelensky has Aries on aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and I don't know what you think about him, but as far as I can see, through his actions, he is prolonging the war in Ukraine. He is, regardless of whether or not he's at fault, he's president of Ukraine at a time when hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and quite a lot of Russians are being killed. I don't know how many Ukrainians have been killed. I would guess it's a minimum. It's a minimum of 500,000. I mean, in military casualties, killed and wounded. It's difficult to know, but the Ukrainian estimates are totally not total underestimates. So, on his watch, hundreds of thousands of his countrymen have been killed, and so that's Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. As I said, Victoria Nuland, the American former employee of the State Department, who was so involved with the Maidan revolt in 2014, that revolt which led to the war in Ukraine, she had Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So it is difficult. Hitler had Aries aspecting the Aries point aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So you get the idea, and it's not pleasant, and I suppose we have to sort of watch for news unfold. But don't get worried about it on a personal level. Well, unless perhaps you're in a trouble spot, if you're in Lebanon or Gaza, or you're a soldier on one side or the other in Donbass, then you might be concerned about it. So that's the picture from New York. Remember, the moon is at 8 degrees 41 Libra at noon in New York. In Sydney, Australia, as a representative of Australasia, at noon on Wednesday, the moon is actually at 1 degree 48 Libra. So this does mean that if you are in Australasia, then at the beginning of the day, maybe up until the late morning, noon, the moon will be moving through the last degrees of Virgo. So if you are in Australasia, perhaps the day will have a slow start, although you might pick up on moon trine Pluto at the beginning of the day, when the moon, just before it leaves Virgo, makes a trine to Pluto. So I don't think that necessarily represents any action, but it may say something about how you feel. So perhaps as the morning progresses, you might feel there's a certain amount of sort of intensity building up, and then suddenly, things change. The moon changes sign, moves into Libra. I know the moon is starts its build up to the new moon, but I think if you are in Australasia, New Zealand, Eastern Asia, then you might feel that the morning has a slow start, but as soon as you sort of, I don't know, late morning, things will, I think, start to move. So turning to the heliocentric picture, so I'm not promising that anything amazing is happening heliocentrically, but I think it's just always important to check to see if we do pick anything up. So that's a heliocentric picture. Mars is slowly moving towards a heliocentric conjunction of of Jupiter. So that perhaps is a note for the future. It's 6 degrees off, so I don't think that conjunction is going to be particularly apparent at the moment. The Earth, you can see, the Sun is conjunct Mercury heliocentrically, but it is starting to separate. And we can see this as a heliocentric aspect. There is Earth, there is Mercury, and so Mercury is moving away from the Earth. It's still 5 degrees, it's still only within 5 degrees of an opposition. So I think that there's still a sense that there is a sort of mismatch between the way we're thinking and what is happening down here on Earth. We may not be sort of entirely comfortable here, and we may be thinking about our environment, our material environment, and just maybe a certain sense that something is out of sync. And perhaps all of us are feeling that at some level, and maybe that's also connected with the fact that we've got this new moon. The new moon does perhaps represent a new beginning, and perhaps we can consider the world around us in a different way. Now, another aspect, Venus is making a square to Neptune. That square to Neptune, I think it's pretty much exact today. We'll feel it a bit tomorrow, I think, as well. So with Venus square Neptune, heliocentrically, remember, there may be a certain sense of maybe confusion about our environment, about other people. It may be at times difficult to understand what is making another person tick, and we might reach the wrong conclusions. Or if you look at the news flow, there might be a focus on things which are very unclear. I suppose Venus square Neptune, you think of glamour and the confusion of glamour, and what is actually happening under the bright lights. It's sometimes very difficult to find out, but perhaps we do need to find out. Going back to the geocentric picture, we've got the Sun conjunct true black moon Lilith, and so Sun conjunct true black moon Lilith geocentrically kind of has a similar message to Venus square Neptune heliocentrically. But I think that the Sun conjunct black moon Lilith is perhaps a more important conjunction, at least on a personal level. So having done that, there's not a great deal I would have said to report in the heliocentric chart. I want to consider the astrology for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, October the 2nd, 2024. Aries. Aries, there is a new moon today, and this new moon is in Libra. It's in your opposite sign. So with this new moon, you may be tempted to give too much emphasis to other people and to other people's influence, and perhaps just to whatever else is going on around you. It may not be about other people, it may just be events, and you may feel that there's so much going on around you that you maybe haven't got enough time for yourself. Now, that's an unusual situation for an Aries to be. Aries as a sign is very self-focused. But with a new moon, obviously conjunct the south node in your opposite sign of Libra, there is a certain temptation to be perhaps overwhelmed, or to think that you just have to respond to what is happening out there. That you might almost think that you're some kind of firefighter, a firefighter having to put out one fire here, one fire there, having to sort of move from place to place, dealing with one situation after another. But as an Aries, it's important that you are centered. The North Node is in Aries. You see, there's the North Node. North Node is very much where you should be going. And the Aries, the North Node is a slow mover. It's been in your sign for a long time, and it will stay in your time. It's stay in your sign for quite a long time. And it's kind of on its own, but it's still there. And it perhaps needs some attention, particularly now with this new moon. This new moon is just encouraging you to forget about what you are supposed to be doing. It's almost a distraction. You're almost forgetting your mission. Now, I'm not saying, though, that you should disregard other people. You can't disregard other people, because if you disregard other people, that doesn't mean they're going to go away. They'll still be there. They'll still be pressuring you. And if you don't fully understand the nature of that pressure, then you could say that when something is out of sight and out of mind, it hasn't gone away. It's actually become stronger, because it can work not just on a conscious level, but it can work on an unconscious level. So, Aries, I think you have to be very honest with yourself about what is preventing you from reaching the target. And you need to perhaps negotiate, but negotiate in such a way that you end up coming out on top. I don't think you want to negotiate from a position of weakness or appear to be in a position of weakness. You have to be clever, though. You have to be subtle. And I don't think you can be a bold, brash Aries, at least on the surface. You have got to show that you understand people's perspective, but just because you understand someone's perspective, it doesn't mean that you have to accept it. Now, another aspect going on is Mars trine Saturn. This Mars trine Saturn has been around for a couple of days, and it's past exactitude, but actually, in some respects, I regard this Mars trine Saturn as being particularly useful today at the time of the new moon, because this Mars trine Saturn does, I think, help to ground you and to focus you. Mars trine Saturn reminds you that you've only got so many hours in a day, that you can't waste time, and that you can really start to really take yourself seriously in a new way. And also Mars trine Saturn might give you a certain amount of harshness, because the Aries point, is 45 degrees from the Mars Saturn midpoint, and so that perhaps does allow a bit of harshness on your part, a bit of toughness if required. I mean, don't be harsh or tough for the sake of it. It's probably unnecessary, but if need be, I do think, Aries, that you are able to look after yourself, and you are able to assert yourself. Now, one word about the concept of Aries as the revolutionary. I think that there is something in you, Aries, that wants something to happen. But I have a feeling that if you are looking for something dramatic to happen, you may have to put it on hold for a little. Now is not the time for bringing to bear dramatic reforms. And I think you've probably understood why already. You know, you've got other people to worry about. You can't do things their way, but you do have to be aware about how other people can limit your freedom of action, and also the fact it is a new moon. You know, new moons are a good time for thinking about revolutions, for thinking about wide-scale reforms. But in terms of actually putting them into practice at the time of a new moon, perhaps not. The time is not right. I think you need to let the lunar cycle develop a bit more. Perhaps wait until you can start seeing the moon, provided there aren't any clouds, and that won't be for another few days. Taurus, you are becoming, I think, quite responsible, and I suppose it's got something to do with the new moon. This new moon for you is certainly the start of a new cycle. When you are aware that there are new things to do, it really is the new season. Whether that season is spring or autumn, I suppose that depends on which side of the equator you are. But the season has arrived with this new moon, and in terms of this season, I think that you do very much understand that there is a sense of obligation, and it's not really an obligation to other people; it's an obligation to yourself. That there are definitely things that have to be done, and they won't wait. I suppose if you're in the US and with tax, so October the 15th, I think that's less than 2 weeks away. October the 15th is the last date that you can file your tax for 2023 if you've got an extension. So you have to pay what you owe, but in the US the tax day is April the 15th, but you can actually postpone it until October the 15th. So that's actually quite an important tax deadline for some people in the US who haven't got their tax together by April the 15th. So if you are in that category, then you are perhaps really feeling that with that new moon in Libra. New moon in Libra, you've got to keep everyone happy, and that includes the authorities, and that includes the IRS or whatever other authority you have to deal with in your home country. Now, this new moon might also, Taurus, make you start to think about your health and well-being, and that's, I would have said, is a good thing. Remember, I'm not giving medical advice here. I'm just looking at it from a perspective of lifestyle, feeling your best. And with a new moon, you might be looking at yourself, looking at your health, what you're eating, what you're drinking, what you're breathing in, and you might just feel that maybe it's not quite good enough, but it could be better. So perhaps you want to start some kind of new routine with this new moon. Of course, get medical advice if you're doing anything drastic, but the new moon might be a good time to make a start on it. There's nothing you have to do like today, but it might be the beginning of maybe doing some research or something like that, and really starting to consider how you feel. And I think that you're going to have a good sense of how you feel overall. I suppose as a Taurus, you are an earth sign, and you generally have a good sense of your body. And with this new moon, I think that your sense is going to be heightened. There'll be a great sense of the whole balance of your body and how the body is sort of fitting together, and whether you're in harmony. And I suppose you have to think about it in a very sort of holistic kind of level. I suppose with sort of modern medicine, with its specializations, likes to focus on one thing, and whereas in practice it should be thinking about everything. And so that is something you can focus on. Good time for giving things up. If you've got a bad habit, then now is the perfect time to expunge it. Now, it's possible also with this new moon if you have animals, small animals. When I say animals, I mean I'm talking about animals smaller than a goat. I'm not talking about your pet horse, for example. I'm talking about animals that are smaller than a goat. I don't know about goat themselves. The goat is a sort of the borderline. But if you do have animals, this new moon may represent some new aspect of your links with your animals, or perhaps if you don't have an animal and you're used to, and you like having animals around and you've got the commitment, then it might be a time where some Taurians feel they need to get a pet, or you're not supposed to call them pets anymore. You're supposed to call them companion animals, aren't you? That might be something you should be doing. But whatever you're doing, it's all about details. Whatever you're, I'm not just talking about animals. It's making sure the details are right, but you don't want to be overwhelmed by the details. The South Node is in Libra, and with the South Node in Libra, there's a certain danger that you just spend a lot of time trying to balance. You try to balance here, you try to balance there, and you're always trying to rebalance. And you think, oh, it's just I sort out this detail, that detail, and then I'll get myself into balance. But you might sort of endlessly be in a state of unbalance. And perhaps what you really need to do is to sort of let go a little and somehow be able to sort of become part of some broader sort of collective being without ever forgetting your ego. Your ego matters, but handling a little bit of chaos, not total chaos, but just handling a bit of chaos and a bit of confusion, living with confusion, but making sure it doesn't get out of hand is perhaps quite important, and that may be the key to having a comfortable day, not just a comfortable day, maybe a comfortable fortnight or even a month as this new moon progresses. Gemini, we have a conjunction between the moon and Mercury in Libra, and in fact it's more than that. We've got moon, sun, black moon Lilith and Mercury in Libra, but I mean I suppose it's the new moon that really matters, and having this new moon said conjunct Mercury, conjunct black moon Lilith in Libra, it is, I think, potentially quite useful. It does allow you to concentrate on the things you do best. There are things you do very well, and you can indeed be very creative with all of these planets in Libra. Libra is an air sign. It has a natural rapport with Gemini, which is of course your sign, and so you do get a sense of what you can do and perhaps what you can do on your own. And in fact, Gemini, you may start coming to the conclusion that you don't actually need anyone else's help, that you can just do everything on your own, that you can rely on your own resources. Well, I wouldn't take that too far. I think that if you were to cut yourself off from the rest of society, then yeah, you might be very clever and you might be able to do lots of interesting things, but you might lose sense of a context. And the context is important. I suppose it's like taking photographs. If you go to a historic place and you take lots of photographs of historic buildings, and I don't know, if you go to Florence and you go to the, I don't know, Ponte Vecchio, and you go to these places, these tourist sites, you can take photographs. And you take these very nice photographs, but so what? There are millions and millions of photographs of the great sites, the Taj Mahal, the Ponte Vecchio, the Grand Canyon, whatever. There are photographs, but so what? What is the point in taking a photograph when the thing has been photographed before? I suppose what makes the photograph special is a relationship to the human world. It's perhaps the human world that makes it special. And who are the people in the photograph? And it's not just about you in the photograph, it's about other people, it's about your friends, or perhaps just passers-by, the human dimension. I mean, maybe that's just me, but then I've got my sun in Gemini. But so it's the same with whatever you do best. It needs a context. Just having a talent on its own is probably, it's nice, but you don't want to exaggerate it. I mean, it's not that special unless you can relate it to your human environment. And I think that actually that Gemini is the key element. You have to balance it. Yeah, you can do something special, but who's going to benefit from this? Who's going to appreciate it? And that is what you have to do. Now, you might think that there is actually a dichotomy, that if you spend too much time worrying about other people, then you can't be truly creative. But the reality is that if you don't worry about other people, perhaps your creativity could be meaningless. So, Gemini, it's very important that you do get the balance right. Now, Mercury, which is your ruler, is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. Sesquiquadrate is an aspect which is 135 degrees. That's 3/8 of the circle. So if you've got a cake divided into 8 equal parts, sesquiquadrate will be 3 of those parts. And with the Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus, something seems to be sort of agitating you a little. It just feels that things are okay, but they're just not quite right. And you might feel that something needs to be said. And it's quite possible that you blurt something out. And something you blurt out, well, it may not be entirely fortunate. And it may be representative of your own agitation. And, you know, what are you agitated about? It's like there's something you need to say, and you need something you need to express. And yes, I'm sure it needs to be said, and I'm sure it needs to be expressed, but you have to do it right. You don't want to say the first thing that comes to mind. You need to sort of work out who you're dealing with, how are they going to respond to what you say, and also, is it useful? You know, just because you're right about something, just because you're even brilliantly right, doesn't mean you should say it immediately. Yeah, you've got to say it in the end, because as I've said earlier on, you've got to consider the social dimension, but you perhaps need to sort of streamline your words. And I think that's something you can do, because Mercury is in Libra, and Mercury does help to smooth things over. But still, people do matter, and in fact, I think some Geminis are going to want to put a lot of energy into interacting with people. Once you get going, you know, I know in the first instance you might think it's a waste of time, but once you get going, once you start to mix with people, yeah, things could move. And I think that not everyone is going to like you, and you're not going to like everyone. But I think social engagement, even though it might feel tough, might be part of what you need to do at the moment. Cancer. Cancer, there is a new moon today. It's a annular eclipse, and it's important. It reminds you of what matters in your life. It reminds you of the basic underlying realities, and I think it is going to be quite grounding, and you're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on your grounding and making sure that you are secure, and you're going to be relatively sensitive. I think you're going to be sensitive to anything that might be undermining you. That's something you'll pick up on very quickly. And at the same time, when you look at your home and your family with this new moon in Libra, you may feel that at some level a fresh start might be a good idea. That perhaps there's something in your home that just isn't satisfactory, and you feel that it can be changed. It could perhaps be a good idea for some new initiative regarding property, real estate, or something like that. That is possible with this new moon. And so that's something you might want to consider, though we have to remember that this new moon is conjunct the South Node. And the South Node has been moving in through Libra for a long time, and it won't be in Libra forever. But while the South Node is in Libra, there is this just ever-present possibility that Cancerians just get the wrong idea about their home. They make perhaps decisions about home, and perhaps family as well, which may feel themselves to be the right decision, but they could just be too focused on the past and what the past was like. And that might be about plain nostalgia. I mean, Cancer can be a very nostalgic sign. And, you might think that the past was wonderful, and that maybe somehow you can recreate the past. And one way in which you can recreate the past is by doing something in your home, or where you're living, which can somehow bring the past back. Might also be the same thing with the family, but while the past is important, and I know that Cancerians tend to have wonderful memories, I mean, at least long memories. Cancerians don't forget much, but they can hoard their memories. And I think to think that you can recreate the past, I'm not sure if that can ever really be done fully. And with this new moon conjunct the South Node, there is a possibility that you make a decision regarding your home and your family, or at least you start to make a decision, which is based on a false premise, or it may be based on you as an emotional being, but you may be being unrealistic. And in order to sort of get around this, you've got to have a sense of balance. You've got to think not just about your home, your family, your roots, whatever makes you feel safe, but you've also got to think about where you're going, and you've got to think about the future. Whatever that might be, what your future, your ambitions, where are things going to be in a few months or a few years' time? Where are things going to be, and what does that say about your concept of security? Now, one thing about security, and I'm talking about security in a sort of broad, sort of general sense, one thing about security is things always change. The world changes, and what gives you security one year is not necessarily going to give you security the next year. It may be that there are new concerns. It may be that old concerns no longer become relevant. So it's important with this new moon that you are able to balance it. Just a new moon could perhaps drive you in the wrong direction. And also, we shouldn't forget that the new moon is conjunct true black moon Lilith. Now, I don't want to be scary with true black moon Lilith. I think I would be seeing true black moon Lilith in this case as on a psychological level. And it is about the past, and just being a little too focused on the past and the memories of the past. And when I say memories, I don't just mean the memories of what happened on a material level, but on the physical plane, but the memories of the emotions of the past. And I think Cancerians do have a good memory for emotions, and you perhaps, with that new moon conjunct true black moon Lilith, you just have to be aware of what might be holding you back, and you don't want to get too caught in the past. So, I'm sorry to be a little bit psychological, but I think it is quite psychological. And I should also say that this new moon conjunct true black moon Lilith may be connected with the parents and with the father, because Libra is the sign which is in the fourth house from Cancer, and of course in Western astrology, maybe not in Hellenistic astrology. I mean, Hellenistic astrology, I think the fourth house is really about the family. Not one's roots in general. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't claim to be an expert on Hellenistic astrology, but general Western astrology, the fourth house is about the father, or it can be about the memories of a father, what the father represents, what the father represents to you. And so even if your father has been dead for a long time, it doesn't matter. The father is still there, and perhaps you can think about your relationship with your father in all its dimensions. And it might have been a good relationship, it might be a bad relationship, and in fact there may be some certain aspects of your relationship to your father which you need to move on from. Now, that's a very general statement because it just does depend on you. It does depend on your gender and how old you are. So I'm not going to be more specific than that. You just have to think about perhaps your father around the time of this new moon, and what that might mean. Leo, there is a new moon, and that's always going to be important. And this new moon, in some respects, is quite communicative. There are certainly things you want to say, and you're perhaps looking around you, and you're looking at people who you might want to talk to. There might be people who you haven't talked to, and you feel that now is the right time, and you might actually be quite good at expressing yourself. And also, Leo, you might feel a little bit restless. You might want to move from place to place, person to person. That might just feel the right thing to do. And perhaps you might spend time with one person or one place, and you might just feel that okay, you've got what you can, you've taken what you can from a situation, so it's now time to move on to someone else, to something else. And so there could be a little bit of inconsistency here, or inconstancy here, just moving from place to place without necessarily accomplishing very much. And actually, if you're honest with yourself, Leo, you perhaps would recognize that there's a certain tendency to be superficial today. I mean, there's a danger. I'm not saying you are superficial at all. I'm just saying there's a risk. There's a risk that you don't go under the surface. You just go from place to place and you never really get to grips with things. So by all means, have your fun, experience the variety of life. But at some stage, you do have to bring it all together and work out what the overall picture is all about. And if you can piece together some broader idea, it could be a philosophy, it could be a sense of purpose, wider purpose. You don't want to you just don't want to get involved in things which just are completely superficial, because I think that would be a bit of a waste. Now, another thing going on, we do have this new moon, but this new moon is conjunct true black moon Lilith. In fact, the sun is conjunct true black moon Lilith today. And the sun is your ruler. And so with sun conjunct true black moon Lilith, it's possible that you may try to make things light, easy, and perhaps superficial. And that just might seem the obvious thing to do. But at some stage, you will start to see something else. If you take things too lightly, then you might stumble across the underlying seriousness of the situation. And that seriousness could be represented by true black moon Lilith. That might, for example, be people who are hiding something quite dark, and they're not being entirely straightforward with you. So that's perhaps another reason why you need to be careful in terms of how you're communicating. It might be very nice, you're talking about nothing in particular, but what is going on in the other person's mind? Indeed, what is actually going on in your mind underneath it all? So on the surface, everything is perhaps nice, but deep down there is something else going on, and that's something that you need to be aware of. And I think you do have to take yourself seriously. You have to take yourself seriously today, not just because you don't want to get yourself into a difficult situation, dealing with someone who is more complicated than they appear on the surface, but you also have to take yourself and what you can do more seriously. There may be things you're actually very good at, but as they stand, they're not quite good enough. And you have to be aware of that, and you have to be honest with yourself. And if you've got something that is sort of half finished, or you've got some skill that is half finished, you're good at it, but only up to a point. Be aware of that. Be aware of your limitations. Because if you are aware of your limitations, Leo, then I think you'll be in a position to do something about it. Just a bit of work, bit of effort, bit of practice could be very good for you. And don't be too proud, Leo. Don't think you're the best. You might well be the best, but you could always be better. And if you have that view, then I think things really can get better, and you can actually achieve the kind of standard that you want to achieve. But yeah, it will require some work, and I think some self-honesty. Virgo, there may be some focus on money, and I'm always careful with money here, because I talk about money, and money is one of the things I need to talk about when I do these horoscopes of the 12 signs. So it's one of the great sections: money, love, money, love, career, business, travel, all this kind of stuff. And I do have to bring it up if it's relevant. But then, of course, I sometimes see the comments and people say, well, they don't care about money. Money's not important to them. It's completely irrelevant to them, whatever. I mean, that does happen. But it's something I do have to talk about. And when there's a new moon, and I'm talking about Virgo, and that new moon is in Libra, I do have to make some reference to money. It's just almost obligatory. So, my apologies if money isn't relevant to you. But with a new moon in Libra, it can well have a financial dimension. It is about what you have, or maybe what you don't have. And for some Virgos, this new moon can represent a new cycle in their financial affairs. You've perhaps had one attitude to money, you've had one relationship to money, and perhaps this new moon means that you have to have a new relationship to money. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to do anything. You don't have to necessarily have to make an extra effort to start saving money or spending money or buying things or whatever. It's perhaps more about a psychological relationship to money, and getting that relationship right is going to be very important, I think. And maybe when you look at your relationship to money, there will be a certain sense of responsibility, and you may be thinking about the past and what you've done with money over the last years, even decades. And there may be a certain sense of regret, perhaps, but you have to, at the same time with this new moon, while it is a new beginning, it can also be about having a more in-depth relationship, not trivializing money, and perhaps in a strange way your attitude to money may not be complicated enough. I know we think about complication as being something bad, but sometimes with money it's good if things are complicated. By complicated, am I talking about being sophisticated? Not really, but it's about things being multi-layered. You always think that people who are responsible with money, people who have a good understanding, who've just stewarded their money correctly, seem to have very complicated financial affairs. That's I don't know, maybe that's not true, but everything is complicated. Everything's in different places. I'm not saying you should start putting lots of money in different areas, but having a complex approach to money, seeing money as something as being complicated, and being aware of those complications, and in some cases going out of your way to make things complicated. I know that doesn't sound right, but it just is something that is important. And if money becomes too simple, it just becomes too fragile. If it's simple, it somehow feels fragile. I don't know if that makes any sense. But overall, Virgo, if you can give money some attention with that new moon in Libra, I think that is the right thing to do. And you probably need to be fairly sophisticated about it if that is appropriate. Now, that's not the only thing going on. We do have a conjunction between the Moon and Mercury, and I think the Moon and Mercury conjunction is actually very nice, and the Moon and Mercury conjunction does allow you to communicate very well, and I think that you're able to communicate about things which may be quite complex, but you can do it in a very straightforward and harmonious kind of way, and I think people will listen to you and they will really appreciate what you're saying. And if you're getting any resistance today, if you feel any sense of resistance, you feel that anyone's dragging their heels and not giving you enough support, then you can up the pace. You can show a little bit of aggression, particularly on a verbal level, but you can do that. It is in quite a subtle way, but you can just up the pace a little, and I think at a certain stage people will realise that you are serious and that you're not someone to be taken lightly, and you can sort of push things through if need be. So I think that you can make things happen. I think that does seem to be very clear. So that's pretty much it for today. I think, going back to this idea of complexity, I think that it's not just about money. I think that you shouldn't be afraid of complexity today, because I think right now you can handle complexity. And I suppose one way of dealing with complexity is you perhaps start off by making things simple, as far as you can. You break things down to their component parts, and then you start to reform them, and then you start to get to grips with things, and then in the end I think you can actually start to understand things which really are quite complicated. And I don't think I'm just talking about today. I'm talking about the way this new moon unfolds. Libra. So Libra, we have got a new moon in your sign, and I would have said that this new moon in your sign is good news. The sun and the moon are in Libra, and for many Librans it really is a new beginning. You can be more yourself. You don't have to hide things, and you could say that your season is very much beginning. That you can make things happen. You can express yourself very well, and you can be clear about what you want. At least you can be clear about what you want. You don't necessarily have to be clear if you don't want to be, but I don't think that would be advisable, to make things unclear or to be just too worried about expressing yourself, expressing the truth. Don't be too worried about that. But this new moon is conjunct the South Node. So what you don't want to do is express yourself in a typically Libran way, because we've got a lot of planets in Libra now. We've got Sun and Moon and Mercury in Libra, and perhaps we're getting a little bit too much pressure in this sign. And we've got the South Node in Libra, and true Black Moon Lilith, but there is some danger with this new moon that you spend too much time being a typical Libran. So the typical textbook Libran is a Libran who likes to compromise, likes to think about other people, likes to balance themselves with the society in which they live, doesn't want to cause any trouble. It's that kind of textbook Libran that I think you want to be aware of, and be careful not to identify with too closely. And perhaps you need to see that side of Libra as just being a protective mask. So with this new moon, I think that it is a time when you can accommodate other people and you can appear to be reasonable. And that's fine up to a point. But you have to ask yourself why. Why are you doing this? Are you doing it just to make yourself feel comfortable? In that case, that is the wrong approach. On the other hand, if you're doing it because there is something you want to achieve, that's different. And you have to think about what you're trying to do and how you are going to influence other people in order to get what you want. So you have to kind of come into other people's world, understand other people's world, appear to accommodate other people's world, but it's all a process of understanding. And you do need to have a clear sense of who you are and what you want to do. And in fact, you also need a certain sense of separation. I think separation is important today. You are connected, but you also have a part of yourself which is different. And you have to understand, Libra, what does make you different, and what makes you special as well. But that requires a certain amount of discipline. So you can be in a social world, but also be separate. And so you do have to make a special effort to get that balance right. But I don't want to take away from the fact that it's really good to have a new moon in Libra. It is a new start, and with this new moon, you're going to be able to, I think, express yourself extremely well, because this new moon is conjunct Mercury, and I think you'll know what to say, and you'll probably have a good memory. And if you know anything about the people you're dealing with, you'll be able to make good use of this knowledge. And, for example, you might remember shared experiences, and shared experiences from the past, even the distant past, can be a very good way of creating connections. I mean, in some cases, Librans might be able to create shared experiences that don't exist, but they kind of seem authentic. So I think that is very very special what you can do. I mean, I suppose that's a standard Libran social skill, and I suppose it does or can verge on the manipulative. But Libra, don't forget, though, that the Sun is conjunct true black moon Lilith. Indeed, this whole new moon is sort of taking place on conjunct true black moon Lilith. Don't, Libra, feel that you can entirely exist on the surface. True black moon Lilith represents things perhaps under the surface, things that perhaps are not very nice, and things you might not want to talk about, things that you might want to just pretend they don't exist. But if you try to hide the truth of the matter, then you could, I don't know, it could be like putting a plaster on an infection and assuming your infection is going to go away. I'm not saying it is an infection, something rotting under the surface, anything like that. I just don't want to be too dramatic about it. But there's something that does need to be addressed, and it might not be very nice, but if you can bring it to light, and I think you can bring it to light, the Sun is conjunct true black moon Lilith, so you could say on a positive note that the Sun is shining light on something, or can shine light on something that is hidden. And of course, when something is hidden and it's brought out into the light, it loses its power. So that might be something, Libra, that you perhaps want to focus on. But again, I don't want to take away from the new moon, today's new moon. It's a special new moon for Librans, and it is a beginning. And if you handle it right, and if you can deal with complexity, and if you can be mature about it, I think that you can really move yourself and your interests on in a way that ends up being very satisfactory. But you do have to be honest with yourself. Scorpio, Mars continues to make a trine to Saturn. This trine between Mars and Saturn has been going on for a few days, but it does continue. And I think that this Mars trine Saturn gives you a certain amount of self-discipline, and you understand that there are things that need to be done, and you're prepared to put in the effort. And you also are aware that there are limits to how much help you can get from other people. I mean, other people can try to help, but do they really know things as well as you do? And it may be the case, Scorpio, that the only person that can do something is you. And if you do try to get other people's help, it may be less than satisfactory. Yet there is also a bit of a trust issue going on here. You do have to trust some people to some extent, and you have to show trust because it's kind of expected of you. And so consider who do you need to trust? Who would like to be trusted? Who can be trusted? You can't do, as I said, you can do many things on your own, but okay, you may not be able to do everything on your own, and giving someone a bit of trust, could make a big difference. And with this Mars trine Saturn, which we do have, which I think that this Mars trine Saturn is an aspect which it's tough, but in a nice way. It grinds on towards its goal. But Venus is starting to get closer to this Mars trine Saturn. Venus could represent another person, and it also represents your sociability. And so perhaps Scorpio, although it's good to be self-contained and self-reliant, you perhaps need to think about how you can bring other people into your struggle. And I'm not saying you should confide in people today. I don't think you should, actually. But I think you need to start to think about who you can trust and who you can confide in, because I think it does matter. And you are not on your own, and you needn't be on your own. And so it's not all about you. Still, we do have a new moon today, and this new moon is in Libra. And I would have said that this new moon could be relatively secretive. There are things that you're going to perhaps realize on your own, in your own way, which start to make perfect sense, especially as this new moon is conjunct true black moon Lilith. Now, I've been a little bit negative about true black moon Lilith in terms of when I've discussed it for previous signs. But for you, I think perhaps you can cope with the energy of true black moon Lilith. And with this new moon conjunct true black moon Lilith, you start to become aware of things, and you start to become aware of the complexity of things. And you also become aware of just what's happening under the surface, at an emotional and perhaps spiritual level as well. And these are things that perhaps are difficult to discuss, but maybe you don't need to discuss them because you just understand it all at an emotional level. And so it's perhaps all about having this new awareness, and this awareness can be informed not just by your observations, but by your imagination, and perhaps by your dreams. So if you have a dream, whether it's a real dream or a daydream or whatever, your dreams are giving you hints about the truth in a very unusual way, and it could be just a symbolic way, but you kind of get a feeling for the way things are going, and it could feel a little bit complicated and disassociated from your everyday world. And I suppose part of the challenge might be to take an unconscious understanding, something that may be in a dream, and take it and bring it down to earth and make it real and make it part of your daily routine. So you take something that is really high level and very difficult to understand, and you can make it into something that is completely understandable and really bring it down to earth. And that may require some kind of initiative, an initiative on your part that is motivated by something very unconscious. But it's not an initiative you have to take today. It's just something you need to be considering over the next couple of weeks. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, yesterday I talked about the fact that Jupiter was conjunct the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Now, the thing about these horoscopes for the 12 signs is that they're not discrete. I mean, when I do the I Ching, that is a discrete reading. That is a discrete reading for the day. It is entirely focused on the day, and it does have a certain amount of subjectivity to it. When I do these horoscopes of the 12 signs, the days are not discrete. One thing runs into another day. So, yes, we had Jupiter conjunct the Mars-Uranus midpoint yesterday, and it's still there. It's in fact more on the Mars-Uranus midpoint than yesterday. So, just to remind you, there is Jupiter. You can see it by eye. There's Jupiter, there's Mars, there's Uranus, and Jupiter is right in the middle between Mars and Uranus. It's exactly on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So, I know I'm sounding repetitive, but I have to repeat myself, because it was an important feature of yesterday, and it's an important feature of today. And so Jupiter on a Mars-Uranus has two sides to it. It can be about you being able to do something very dynamic, having a great sense of your own freedom and about what you need to do in order to sort of break free from things that are holding you back, and being able to express yourself with power and vitality. That is a positive side of it. But there is a downside, and Mars-Uranus as a pair is connected with accidents. It can be connected with accidents, because Mars-Uranus is a very unstable combination. So perhaps if you don't express yourself in one way, in a way that you are in control of, then at an unconscious level, you could express yourself in another, less fortunate way. So if you want to do something, and if you want to express something, as we see with this Jupiter conjunct Mars-Uranus, you should be perhaps open about it. Because if you repress it, then it may appear elsewhere in another way, like making a mistake, tripping up, something like that. So that Jupiter conjunct Mars-Uranus is powerful, and I think it can be very beneficial. In fact, Jupiter conjunct Mars-Uranus, it's just possible that you can benefit from someone else's accident, or some organization's accident. Something goes wrong, someone makes a mistake, and you're the person that can sort it out. Or because something goes wrong, in some way, it works, it runs in your favor. So I suppose that is a possibility. I suppose I should look at what Alfred Witte says in his Rules of Planetary Pictures about Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. I haven't looked this up before. I don't know whether this is appropriate. At least just see what he says. You see, he says, success through spontaneous decisions or acts, fortunate in danger, and, as I was saying, suggesting good luck in injury. That's kind of interesting. So that might be the hint that something goes wrong. It seems bad, but actually it works out to be a blessing in disguise. I mean, I think that is a possibility if you take Witte's logic, but that makes sense because Jupiter is is a fortunate planet, but it's on this rather difficult midpoint of Mars and Uranus. So that's Jupiter on a Mars-Uranus midpoint. We also have a new moon today, and this new moon is in Libra, and I think with this new moon you're going to be quite focused on what you want, not what you want in a materialistic sense, but in terms of what you want in terms of, where is your overall direction? Where what's it all about? What is your destiny? Where are your dreams taking you? What are your hopes for the future? And I think that this new moon is going to sort of allow you to start to think about this, and it could be quite a complex process. You might think, for example, that the right way to go is to understand the community, to understand the group, to understand group processes, to be part of the group. There may be some truth in that, but I think you don't want to overstate that. That new moon could potentially take you in the wrong direction. It might make you a little too sociable, and you might forget about other things that are important to you. So ask yourself with this new moon, what really matters? Who are you? Who are you fundamentally? And what do you need to protect? And what do you need to keep practicing? What must you never lose touch of? Remember all of that, and then start to think about society. And is it possible that the pressure from society, perhaps pressure from your friends, there could be trends in society, look at how that pressure could actually take away what is special to you. And it all starts with you, and that's the way it should be, Sagittarius. So by all means, with this new moon, have a great social life. You can have a great social life over the next couple of weeks, but don't sacrifice anything. Don't sacrifice who you are, who you fundamentally are. And I think that's, that is perhaps the main message. And also, the moon is conjunct. The moon does make a conjunction to Mercury, so the way you talk, the way you communicate, always come back to who you are and what you've got to give. And if you feel that you're not able to do that, that you're being crowded out by other people's interests and concerns, then that's the time to reconsider the situation. Capricorn got a new moon, and this new moon I think is an important event for Capricorns, and this new moon takes place in Libra, and Libra is a cardinal sign and Capricorn is a cardinal sign. So with this new moon, Capricorn, you're probably going to be thinking a great deal about your direction. Where are you going? And it might feel that it's like, a point of departure. One thing has ended and another thing has started, and you just may want to reconfigure your sense of direction and perhaps, what your goals are for the last quarter of 2024. Yeah, it's a new quarter, isn't it? The new quarter started yesterday on October the 1st. So, what are your goals for the new quarter, for the last quarter of 2024, and how do they need to be changed? You've accomplished a fair amount since January, but I'm sure you haven't accomplished everything. And I think that this new moon reminds you that you do need to move forward, and you move forward, but perhaps you also have to move back as well. And you perhaps have to consider some unfinished business. Unfinished business is part of it. And maybe the challenge here is going to be taking unfinished business and finishing it, but making sure that unfinished business doesn't completely overwhelm you. So the trouble about having to deal with unfinished business is that you spend so long dealing with unfinished business that there's nothing left for anything else. And so you're kind of stuck and you don't move on. And so Capricorn, it's important that you get a real sense of what you're trying to achieve. And with this new moon, I think you do have a good sense of it. And this new moon is conjunct Mercury. So Capricorn, I don't think that you'll have any difficulty telling people what you want, explaining what you want, and I think being pretty assertive. You do make it clear, and if you're being blocked or anyone's in your way, Capricorn, then I don't think you're going to have any difficulty clearing a path for yourself. When you want to be, you can be brutally honest. Today, no problems at all. You can say what's on your mind. There's really nothing. There's really nothing that's going to stop you. So, honesty is the right approach, but it's also honesty in terms of yourself and also what you're trying to accrue. So, by what you're trying to accrue is, you move forward, and I'm not just talking about today, I'm talking about, over the next few weeks. You move forward, you make progress, but at the same time you need to accrue something. You need to be able to take something out which builds on your own sense of security. So you have to go forward, but also make sure that the ground on which you're standing is as secure as ever and is actually made more secure by your progress. So progress on its own, without thought, is meaningless progress. It doesn't get you anywhere. You have to use progress in one direction to help you in the other direction. So you kind of have to work on two different levels, but fundamentally what matters is your own security. And I suppose if you want to look at this from a military perspective, you suppose you have to make sure your supply lines don't get overextended. So if you go too far in one direction, you may lose touch with your sources of supply, and in the end you get cut off, and that is not a good situation. So always make sure that it's sort of really it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Yeah, you move forward, but always make sure that your own security and your own supply lines are all in good order. So if you do that, I do think that this new moon is very constructive, and I think that you can deal with all sorts of different things, because this new moon is actually on true black moon Lilith, and I think in your case the new moon on true black moon Lilith is possibly a good thing, because it may enable you to just deal with areas that just other people can't deal with. Maybe they think it's just too difficult, it's too dark, it's too dangerous. It's not dangerous, I don't think, in a physical way, but it's just dangerous. It might feel a bit dangerous emotionally, but you can probably deal with things that other people can't, and that might give you an advantage, and perhaps that might give you a competitive advantage. Aquarius, overall, I believe you have a strong sense of yourself and what you can achieve, and you're not really in the mood for taking any nonsense from other people. Yeah, I think that you Aquarius can really look after yourself, and if you run into trouble, you'll be able to give as good as you get. I think. Okay, you could take things too far. That is possible. You don't want to be too assertive when it's actually not necessary. So the broad picture today is, we've got a new moon, and this new moon is in Libra, and Libra has a fortunate relationship to Aquarius, which is, of course, your sign. And this new moon could be quite exciting. I mean, there is, of course, a new moon in Libra every year. I mean, that's the way it goes. So it's not a super unusual event. But, this new moon is about thinking about your sense of purpose and why you're on this planet. And it's not about limitation. You should be thinking about, expanding your experiences and your horizons and looking at the world in a new way, and perhaps marveling at how complex and interesting the world is. And perhaps some of that complexity is something you want to make yours, and you want to perhaps make your life more interesting, and expand your horizons. So that's what this new moon is about. However, this new moon is conjunct the South Node, and the new moon is powerful. It's interesting, but it could be a little bit deceptive. It's also conjunct true black moon Lilith. It is deceptive in the sense that it may perhaps be a little overwhelming. It is nice to expand your horizons, to understand more stuff, to find out what's happening on the other side of the world, to realize what opportunities are out there. But there's a certain danger that you do get overwhelmed. You come across a broad philosophical, spiritual outlook that just seems interesting. It seems really forward-looking, but if you're honest with yourself, it's not actually attached to anything. It's no good just having ideas. Ideas have to be grounded, and you have to be critical. Now, Aquarius, as a sign, has a certain reputation for being critical. You can be critical, but you might just find that you don't want to be critical. You don't want to ask questions. Why spoil it? Why spoil the magic? And that could be your attitude to this new moon. You take on board things without asking why, what it actually means. So, I don't know, could be working in a political sense. If you are in the United States, got an election coming up, Trump versus Harris, you may just take the broad philosophy of one candidate or the other. I'm not saying this is you, I'm just giving this as an example, of one candidate or the other, and you might not think it through. You might not ground it in terms of your own experience, and you might just not ask the key questions. You might not fight back intellectually, and I think that would be a shame. And fighting back intellectually is very important today, and indeed, over the next couple of weeks, as this lunar cycle develops, always ask questions. It might not seem appropriate, but if if you come across an interesting philosophy, yeah, it's easy to just say, or an interesting set of ideas, it's easy to just say, fine, that seems good, it's popular, let's just go with it. But got to ask questions. The questions really are important. And it's not going to be easy to ask questions, I don't think. It's going to be hard work. But it is the right thing to do. And if you, in general, discover facts that contradict a worldview, you can't just discount those facts. Those facts are real, and you need to work with them. And it's not perhaps just about anything like philosophy or spirituality. It may be about something you want to do that's very important to you, and for some reason you just don't want to ask questions. But you have to ask questions, and that's what perhaps being an Aquarian is all about. But don't worry, you can do it, and you can show some grit and determination. You are able to assert yourself, absolutely. And this is especially the case with Mars trine Saturn. Okay, it's starting to fade, that trine between Mars and Saturn, but it's still there. And if you assert yourself and you think critically and you behave critically and you don't take things at face value, and perhaps you're a little bit attacking, might feel the wrong thing to do to be a little bit attacking. I don't mean physically attacking, but mentally attacking. Just a little bit of attack and questioning. It could just change everything. And it's I do believe that it is the right thing for you to do. Pisces. Pisces, I was mentioning to Sagittarius that Jupiter was on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And I have to say the same thing to you, because Jupiter is your ruler. And I know that Jupiter was on your Mars-Uranus midpoint yesterday, but it's still there. In fact, it's even closer to the Mars-Uranus midpoint today than it was yesterday. Now, this is a midpoint which we can see by eye. It's not some complicated midpoint with some difficult aspect to see, like a semi-square or a sesquiquadrate. You can see it. There is Jupiter, 21 Gemini. Mars is at around 16 Cancer. Uranus is at 27 Taurus. What's the midpoint? Jupiter's. You can see it. Jupiter's on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and Jupiter is a ruler. Is a ruler of Pisces. And so, this is another of these situations where I have to repeat myself, because the astrology does, with these 12 signs, one day merges into another. These days are not discrete units. So with Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, it is quite action orientated, and there are things that you want to do. Now, with this Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, you might find yourself putting a fair amount of energy into your home. I mean, I think in a way this has been going on since the end of May, since Jupiter moved into Gemini. But with Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, I mean, I suppose on a practical sense, and make sure everything is in order at home, and don't take risks. It's possibly a bad day for doing work at home, as in, drilling holes or anything like that, or more substantial work than that, unless you've got someone who absolutely knows what they're doing. Because if someone doesn't know what they're doing and they're doing work around the home, and from a Pisces perspective, things could go wrong with Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. I mean, I'm sure nothing bad's going to happen. I just thought I had to point that out. Though, with Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, you are quite energized, and I think you're actually aware that things can go wrong, and things might not just go wrong for you, but it might actually go wrong for other people. And if things go wrong for other people, as I was telling Sagittarius, you may actually be able to benefit from the situation, because Jupiter is a fortunate planet. it's a greater benefic. So it's on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So there is scope for benefiting from someone else's accident. I don't know. Maybe if someone else is drilling holes in their walls and you're an electrician or a builder or something, you can charge them money by having to fix their mistakes. But I doubt you're watching this if you're a Piscean builder or plumber, or whatever. But there is that possibility of being able to benefit from someone else's misfortune. I mean, that doesn't mean to say you can revel in someone's misfortune. Doesn't mean to say you want someone to have a misfortune. But if someone's had a misfortune, I suppose it's got to be fixed, and you might be the person who can sort it out. Aside from that, we do have a new moon. New moon is in Libra, and this new moon is conjunct Black Moon Lilith and true Black Moon Lilith. And so with this new moon, it could be a fairly complicated new moon. It could be perhaps emotionally complicated. Now, you are a Pisces. You can deal with a high level of complication, more than others. And emotion is something you're quite natural. You naturally understand the emotional undercurrents. So perhaps you're able to sort of ask questions, really deep emotional questions of yourself, and this new moon does allow you to go deep, and it allows you to maybe understand some aspects of the past that have got hidden. None of us are entirely nice people, and perhaps you're able to tune into parts of yourself which aren't particularly nice, and perhaps you can understand them, and maybe you can link them with the past. Though this new moon might also have a financial dimension. It's a good time for Pisceans to ask difficult and complicated questions of other people, or to consider what is the underlying truth behind a bank statement or a legacy or some agreement. What does the small print say? And I think that Pisceans will be actually very good at getting into the small print and asking themselves, why does that small print exist? What is someone intending? And so if you are having an agreement over the next couple of weeks, you want to sign some agreement, the small print does matter. And I think that you're going to be very good at understanding other people's inner motivations, and I think that could give you a crucial advantage. And now I want to move on from the 12 signs and consider the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was 49, revolution. So revolution gives us the idea that things need to change. I suppose it's the day of a new moon, and new moons are about change, and we perhaps realize that something has come to an end. I suppose it's the end of a lunar cycle, beginning of a new lunar cycle. So we have to instigate some kind of change. And a revolution is not about just breaking things for the sake of it. You have revolutions in order to maintain the status quo. That sounds completely ironic, doesn't it? The thing is, the status quo is the balance. And sometimes if things are not changed and you allow the status quo to rot and to decay, then you get real problems. Then things collapse on each other and things are out of control. So what you do need to do is you need to create a change to make sure that things don't collapse. And I think that is perhaps in keeping with the Confucian philosophy underlying the I Ching, that the I Ching is about, so the Confucian philosophy is about tradition and maintaining structures, and the structure of a family is the basis for the structure of society, and you want to maintain that structure, and you want to maintain good order in that structure. And sometimes that structure becomes worn, it becomes frayed, it starts to become decayed, or perhaps one person in the unit starts to misbehave. And so that's when you need a revolution. You need to have a revolution in order to maintain stability, ironic as that might sound. And so what is it that you feel needs to be changed? It could be minor, it could be major, whatever it is, that is something that you perhaps need to consider. And it is quite a substantial change. And it's very important to get your timing right. And, I wonder, I was asking about today, I was asking what is Wednesday going to be like? But I suppose it's a new moon. And I've asked this question on a new moon. It may have some relevance to the entire lunar cycle between now and the next new moon, which is November the 1st. That is a possibility. But still, the intention was to focus on today. And there's the kettle going. Oh, it's gone. And so there are 3 moving lines here. And the third line moves. And the I Ching certainly recognizes that a revolution is required. But with the third line moving, the advice is wait. Don't have your revolution until you've talked about it 3 times. The first time, you suggest a change might be required. But it's not the right time. Maybe you don't get enough enthusiasm. A second time, a bit more urgent, but still nothing happened. But then on the third time of speaking, that's the time, it's enough, the time is right, something needs to happen. So do get the timing right. And just because you feel that something needs to be changed doesn't mean to say it has to happen absolutely immediately. Then the 5th line moves. And the 5th line is a fortunate line. It's talking about the drama of change. We're ready. I think I Ching says something like, we change like a tiger. The time is right. No need to hesitate. We've been through the process. People are ready. We're ready. And the change can happen. And so the change has to happen quickly because it won't wait any longer. We know we've got our timing right. Then the top line moves as well. And the top line is a reminder that we ourselves know that change is necessary. The revolution has to happen. Now, we can be quite persuasive about it. We can tell other people about how this change is necessary, but their commitment is half-hearted. They say fine, but do they really, really deep down want change? Or do they even care about change? And that really shouldn't bother us, because the time for change has now arrived. And if we're committed, then that is enough. Yeah, to begin with, people are going to be going through the motions, and they'll have to work things out at a later stage. But it does mean that we have to be prepared to see it through. We can't rely on other people. It seems we get enthusiasm. There's evidence we see this enthusiasm, like when we change like a tiger, people listen to us. But it's perhaps soon becomes clear that they're not as committed as we are. But that is okay. Now, this hexagram, it does change. And because we've got 3 moving lines. And it changes to hexagram number 21, which is biting through. And this hexagram is about punishment and discipline. And perhaps it builds on what I was saying in the previous hexagram about a lot of people being half-hearted. A lot of people are not on our wavelength. A lot of people are perhaps slacking. And I mean, it depends on the situation, but I think we may become aware that some people are not fully committed and are perhaps even not being helpful. And by biting through, what it means is that you've got someone who is intransigent. They're I suppose, represented by hard leather. They just don't want to. They don't want to move, and it's saying you have to bite through to find the gold, or I think it talks about the bronze, and so you have to find that. And I suppose that's a kind of punishment where you're thinking about reforming someone. You have to find the good in people. Perhaps you have to be critical. Perhaps you have to sort of get people to ask questions. Whatever is appropriate. It's not punishment just for the sake of punishment. It's about doing something to make someone see the light and getting people to understand things from your perspective. Of course, some people are incorrigible. They can't be helped. And in that case, you should perhaps just let them go their separate ways, whatever, nothing you can do about it. But don't give up on people if they don't have the enthusiasm that you expect of them. It may just be they need to be persuaded, they need to be shown that your way is the right way, and then you can sort of bite through the leather and find the gold within them. And that's the I Ching. And now I want to consider the horoscope of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, there are a few issues with the horoscope of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, I'm guessing that whatever chart I put up, someone is going to comment and tell me I've got the wrong time. And the issue with Mahatma Gandhi is that if you go to the Rodding rating and you go Astro.com's data bank, it has a C rating. So C it's not well sourced. We don't know for sure what time he was born. And different people have their different times. And so let me look at the chart that I'm going to be using. So let's okay. So looking at Mahatma Gandhi's horoscope. So I've gone for 7:08 and 12 seconds, which is of course a ridiculously exact time. Now there are times that I've seen times that go through up until 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning. Most of the times seem to be 7 or 8 in the morning. And if you look at different websites, often websites relating to Vedic astrology, you're going to see different times. So if you're very familiar with Gandhi's horoscope, you might feel you want to comment and tell me I've got the wrong time. Well, whatever time I put or I used, someone would tell me I've got the wrong time. That's so, and I don't want to use a noon chart with this because I think it does seem he was born in the morning. And as far as the ascendant is concerned, well, if we take some of the later times given, or using his Western chart, that gives us a possibility of him could have Libra rising, he could have Scorpio rising. His Vedic chart, is a different matter. So what I'm saying is that there are issues with Mahatma Gandhi's chart, and yeah, so you might feel I'm using the wrong time. So if I go for him as being a double Libra, and I do understand he might well have Scorpio rising. Indeed, he might have some other sign rising, but I think it's likely that he's got Libra or Scorpio rising. From a Vedic perspective, it seems to be pretty much all Libra rising. I don't think there's any question about that, as far as I can see. All the astrologers I've seen on the internet looking at his Vedic chart have Libra rising, but Western, there is this question about whether it's Libra and Scorpio. Now, he's got the sun in Libra, and possibly has Libra rising as well, Western. And you could say that he does very much embody typical Libran. Libra is about non-violence, and that's what he's famous for. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. not trying to fight people with with violence. He was a campaigner for Indian independence, but he didn't want to have a violent conflict with the British, and just through just non-cooperation, that was his approach. And you could say that that is perhaps Sun in Libra at its highest level, though not everyone was happy about this. It led to his death. After independence, he wanted some sort of accord with Pakistan, and before independence, he was trying to sort of bring together the various elements of Indian society, whether it be Hindus or Muslims, and plus obviously the caste issue. And after independence, he pressured the Indian government to, give Pakistan some money that may or may not have been owed. And so sort of Hindu, from a perspective of a Hindu nationalist, remember he was assassinated by a Hindu nationalist, that Sun in Libra was not to their liking. You do not compromise with the enemy. I suppose he wanted to avoid having a polarized society. Now, a criticism of Gandhi, certainly from a perspective of being a Hindu nationalist, is that he was naive. He assumed that everything could be fine. He assumed that people could come to some kind of agreement, that people would not attack and kill each other. And that might be one way of looking at Libra. Maybe he was too optimistic about human nature, and that optimism might have extended to some of his ideas about technology, the ideas that you can get back down to basics. He had seen, for example, how the Indian cotton industry had been devastated by imports from Britain, cheap textiles from the Lancashire cotton mills, and he wanted to get things back to basics. And of course, that's why I believe there's a spinning wheel on the Indian flag, that people can make their own stuff, make their own clothes with their spinning wheel. And so you might say that with the Sun in Libra, that might be one aspect. Yeah, there could be a certain naivety there. Now, if we've got his time of birth right, which I have no idea for sure how accurate this time. This is 70812 is actually I think it's a rectified time. I think an astrologer, Cyril Fagan, who was a proponent of sidereal astrology, rectified it to 70812. So that may or may not be the right time. But if it is 70812, it's nice that Uranus is on the midheaven. So here is someone who is a revolutionary, and it's Uranus in Cancer. And Uranus in Cancer is about the country. Cancer, it's about changes within the country, revolution in one's country. But Cancer is the homeland. And so Uranus on the midheaven does fit a revolutionary. And the tradition, perhaps, of wanting to sort of focus on, homespun industries, the spinning wheel, having a deep skepticism about modern technology, that also fits Uranus in Cancer. It's kind of wanting to go back to the past, that the past was somehow better. And it may have been an unrealistic vision, but still, he had Uranus in Cancer, and perhaps he had Uranus in Cancer on the midheaven. Now, there are a few sort of rather complicated things about the chart. He's got a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. So Jupiter-Pluto conjunction can be about someone who is very focused on making things better, not being satisfied with the way things are. And, one shouldn't forget that he wasn't just fighting for justice in India, but also in South Africa. When he was practicing as a lawyer in South Africa, he stood up against a sort of embryo apartheid regime. I mean, I don't really know much about turn of the century South African politics, but clearly he was a major figure in the struggle, in the sort of the struggle for sort of justice in South Africa against a sort of a white regime. And so one shouldn't forget two aspects of his activities. So there's Jupiter, Pluto, but that Pluto he's got Pluto opposition Venus, Pluto opposition Mars. So we could look at Pluto opposition Mars and see that as being quite transformative. And look at the moon. He's got moon in Leo, and so moon in Leo square Jupiter square Mars. The moon is about him, how he expresses himself, and it's quite tough. He was quite tough on himself. He was quite I don't say puritanical, aesthetic lifestyle, and I think he sort of became celibate in his 30s. I think that's the case, but Mars Pluto is tough. It could be about the revolutionary struggle. Mars Pluto, he feels he has to push things to the absolute limit. But of course, in his case, Mars Pluto is not about violence. Anything to do with sort of not killing. And so the moon square Mars square Pluto, that is perhaps quite intense. But also he has got Pluto on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And I think with Pluto on the Venus-Mars midpoint, that does say something about sexuality. And with Pluto is a point of obsession. And there is somehow a sexual obsession there, which kind of links to his celibacy. You're so concerned about sex that it's a big issue. And I think that, I don't really know the details, but he would sort of put himself in positions of being tempted by having women around him, but still being celibate. And that might be how Pluto on the Venus-Mars conjunction might be working. So those are a few thoughts about his chart. I mean, I should say that I don't have a great sense with his chart. I don't feel that his chart really chimes with me. I don't find it a chart that. I mean, I haven't really looked at it very hard, but at the moment, I'm not too comfortable with it. Maybe I haven't got the right time. Maybe he was born later. Now that is his chart from a Western perspective, and I think it might be useful to actually look at his chart from a Vedic perspective. So here is his Vedic chart, and turning to his Vedic chart, see, that's his ascendant. I know I'm sorry, it's not very easy to see, but you see AS, that's it, the mansions the moon is in, and there's 7, it's in Libra. So using 7-8 AM, he's got a Libra ascendant, and Libra is going to be rising for the next few hours. So if you're using a later time, 7, a couple of hours over the next couple of hours, Libra would still be rising. Now, a couple of points about the Vedic chart. Firstly, he's got, remember the moon was in Leo in his Western chart. In his Vedic chart, the moon goes back into Cancer. And of course, Cancer is ruled by the moon. So we've got the moon in the 10th house. And so the moon in the 10th, in the 4th house, in the moon in Cancer in the 10th, it's really a very good position for the moon to be in by and large. And it is conjunct Rahu, which does sort of create a few complications, but someone who is able to make a name for themselves. And in Indian astrology, the angular houses, the Kendra houses, are important. So there's the first house, 10th house, 7th house, and the 4th house. A lot of planets in Kendra houses. In other words, in the cardinal houses, and 1st, 10th, 7th, 4th, and that potentially gives a strong chart. I mean, that makes someone they are able to have a powerful impact. And a lot of stuff in the ascendant. The ascendant has got Mercury in Libra, Venus in Libra, Mars in Libra, and so that perhaps indicates someone who is powerful. Now, look at his sun. Now, remember, in Indian astrology, the sun does not have the central role that it does in Western astrology. So in Vedic astrology, his sun is actually in Virgo. So it has a sort of a different energy to it. It doesn't have that central role. And I think that, the moon is going to be more important. And in fact, the entire predictive system, the Vimshottari Dasha system, is essentially a form of lunar progression. And we got Jupiter in the 7th. Now, that Jupiter in the 7th, there are a number of ways of looking at it. Jupiter represents perhaps the other, and it could represent enemies, but Jupiter is also the Atma Karaka. So in Vedic astrology, you have a planet which is your Atma Karaka. And the Atma Karaka, as I understand it, Atma is the soul, and Karaka means the ruler, sort of a ruler of your soul, what your real purpose actually is. The Atma Karaka is the planet in the latest degrees. Remember, using the sidereal zodiac, not the Western zodiac, so you can't use your normal Western chart to work out your Atma Karaka. You have to look at your Vedic chart, and you look at the planet which is in the highest degrees. So you can see it's got Mars at 26, 21, Mars 26, 21 Libra, and so that's quite high. Moon is at 27.54 Cancer, but Jupiter is at 28.08 Aries, and so that means that Jupiter is the Atma. Jupiter is the Atma Karaka, and in fact, if you look at here, you see this program. It has Jupiter. There's an AK here. I don't know if you can read that, and that means the Atma Karaka. So there's something special about Jupiter, which is talking about his journey and what it's all about. And I suppose it's in the 7th. It's about, maybe that's about looking at the other, and maybe, I suppose, that's a rather Western psychological approach. But it may also say something about his eventual assassination. So he was assassinated on January the 30th, 1948, by a Hindu nationalist. And in terms of his dasha, in India, in Indian astrology, they divide life up into 9 discrete periods, and so ruled by the 7 planets plus Rahu and Ketu, the north and south node. And his Jupiter dasha started on June, assuming I got this time right, June the 6th, 1940, and it ended on June the 5th, 1956. So I think pretty much regardless of what time you take, he's going to have. He was murdered in his Jupiter dasha, and Jupiter, perhaps his murder, because what happened in his Jupiter dasha? Well, I suppose in his Jupiter dasha, India got independence, and also he was assassinated, and he had Jupiter in the 7th house. Now, the 7th house in Indian astrology can be related to death, and as we do know that it's Atma Karaka, that's what it was all. He had done his bit, and so perhaps it's not surprising that he died during his Jupiter Dasha. Well, he was 78 when he died. So even if he'd lived until 1956, he would have been in his late 80s. So there's a good chance that he would have perhaps died of old age before the end of his Jupiter Dasha. And in terms of his Subdasha, if I've got this time right, he was assassinated in his Jupiter Mahadasha and his Ketu Subdasha. There's the South Node in the 4th house. I mean, that sort of symbolizes something perhaps a little bit difficult. Well, that does rather depend on his time of birth, what Subdasha he was in. So those are a few thoughts on Mahatma Gandhi's Vedic chart. So going back to his natal chart, his Western chart, so I was sort of kind of thinking about how does this relate to his death. I mean, you'd expect for someone to, when they are assassinated like this, for it to sort of really show up in terms of transits. So here's his death, and okay, so here is oh no, that's not the right one. Sorry, let me just so there's let me just look at, sorry, one moment. Okay, there are his transits when he died. Now I'm not promising that anything really important happened in terms of transits, because transits are only one way of looking at things. We do get concerned about transits, but transits are not the only way of making forecasts in astrology. The South Node was sort of conjunct his Mars when he was assassinated, so I suppose you could sort of say the South Node is about some kind of association, and it hits his Mars, and Mars has a violent potential to it. So that is certainly a way of looking at it. The North Node was conjunct his Jupiter. Now, one thing that Gandhi had in his chart was a Mars-Jupiter opposition, which I hadn't really talked about. So a Mars-Jupiter opposition is actually a very difficult aspect. I think Charles Carter described it, I think, as the most difficult aspect in the book, a Mars-Jupiter opposition, and Gandhi had it. And certainly Mars-Jupiter opposition inclined Gandhi to really push things, putting a huge amount of energy into whatever battles he was engaged in, whether it was his battles for justice in South Africa, the fight for independence in India, not just a fight for independence, but a fight for people to be treated fairly, regardless of caste or religion. So he puts a huge amount of energy there into that. But it's also quite dangerous, and it certainly makes him vulnerable to assassination, I would have said. And look at the North Node. The North Node, when he was assassinated, was at 1938 Taurus. So it was pretty close to his Jupiter, and it was opposition his Mars. So the North Node was very close to his Mars-Jupiter midpoint. And so I think that is perhaps the key transit in terms of his assassination. And I suppose you could also say North Node conjunct Jupiter maybe is representative of the fact that it was perhaps his time to go. I mean, that's certainly possible. Now look at Neptune as well. Neptune is close to his Sun, not exactly on his Sun. But I'll be coming back to this transit. So broadly speaking, Neptune conjunct Sun, we do see sort of dissolution and moving on, becoming part of something else. But I will be coming back to that aspect. When I look at what was going on for him at the time of India's independence. Now, as far as solar returns, we can calculate 2 solar returns for Mahatma Gandhi. We can calculate his solar return. Well, I want to look at his solar return for when he was assassinated. So this was for October the 3rd, 1947, when he was assassinated. He was assassinated on January the 30th, 1948. So here's the solar return. When you've got a solar return, always look at the moon as well as the sun. And the sun, okay, moving towards a conjunction of Neptune. Just a reminder that we had that Neptune transit. The transit is sort of baked into the solar return, but also the moon. The moon is making a square to Pluto, and eventually it makes a square to Saturn. So the moon might give some hints that there could be a problem in terms of the year ahead. And also, this solar return, again, assuming I've got the time right, but it's still in the solar return. Assuming you've got Virgo rising in this solar return, Mercury, ruler of the ascendant and the midheaven, is at 1 degree Scorpio, and it is square Mars. So Mercury square Mars would certainly be an indication of an assassination or some kind of danger. And I want to finish by looking at what was happening to Mahatma Gandhi at the time of India's independence. So here is the chart for India getting its independence, and on the outer wheel we've got Mahatma Gandhi's chart. So let's actually let's reverse that and put Mahatma Gandhi in the middle and put India on the outer wheel. Now, at the time of India's independence, assuming we've got Mahatma Gandhi's time right, the moon was at 27 degrees. The moon was at 27 degrees Cancer. So the moon was exactly on his midheaven. But we have to remember the time I'm using is rectified. So the person rectifying this chart might have sort of made it so that the moon is on the midheaven. So we shouldn't necessarily be too impressed by the fact that the moon is on the midheaven when India got its independence. But although I suppose it kind of fits, doesn't it? This is the culmination of his ambition. And look at Neptune. Neptune was at 850 Libra, and his sun is at 856 Libra. So Neptune right conjunct his sun. So that does indicate that something is over, that his work is done. He's no longer fighting for independence. He's got independence, and now he's handing over or secular rulers, Nehru, and I suppose in Pakistan you've got Jinnah, and so you've got politicians taking over. The ideal is over, and maybe that's Neptune conjunct the Sun, just having to sort of let go of the whole project. And I suppose there may be aspects of the way India transitioned to independence that perhaps he wasn't too happy about. And look at Jupiter. Look at Jupiter. He's got Mars-Jupiter opposition in his natal chart. Remember, the node was hitting his Mars-Jupiter opposition when he was assassinated, and Jupiter was conjunct his Mars opposition Jupiter. So again, Jupiter was on his Mars-Jupiter midpoint when India got its independence. So that just illustrates how important that Mars-Jupiter opposition in his chart was for him. Okay, that's it. That's all I'm going to say about Mahatma Gandhi. I wish him a happy 155th birthday, wherever he might be. And thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you are not subscribed, I would be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.